One of the most characters in the My Hero Academia universe that got done so dirty at the end of the manga. As much as I love My Hero Academia, you guys know I'm a big fan. I pretty much wrote a script 5 years ago about the fight between Prime All Might versus Prime All for One. You can check the 3 parts, by the way, link in the description. But one of the most characters that got done insanely dirty is All for One. We got introduced to this powerhouse of a character, this menacing character that was aura farming while he had a potato head. And as much as I love My Hero Academia, I feel like the power scaling issue that the manga has is pretty much an issue that a lot of people can see. And I'm not saying like, oh, it makes the manga bad because, the power is not consistent, but it just takes off of that intensity of the character. Because, for example, I'll give you the basic example. We see All for One in his prime obliterating an entire Iceland. Like, he made an entire Iceland explosion size when he basically killed Nana Shimura, and Toshinori Yagi, basically All Might, and Gran Torino had to fled outside of the Iceland. That explosion alone is like an Iceland level type of an explosion because it's not an arena. It was pretty much shown to us that they were in the middle of the sea, so it pretty much implied that this is an Iceland, right? And he pretty much like created an entire explosion with no effort. He was like, goodbye, Nana Shimura, boom, she's gone, It's like the pocket sand attack. But what's really crazy is that we get to see him at the end of the manga, and he pretty much can do so much small of a scale of an attacks that it makes no sense. So in this video, I pretty much just want to go in all the feats of All for One and pretty much just put him on a scale of like 1 to 10. Where is he located in the My Hero Academia ranking? Because a lot of people do mistake that where he is. Some people think he's like number 10 or number 8 when he's a lot higher than that. But as I said, he got done really dirty in the manga. I get that Horikoshi want to show the students growing, but that was too much. Like, that's insane. You're getting, like, for example, in the manga, Primal for One fighting against the Class 1A, and he's getting his ass handed to him, right? And that pretty much doesn't make sense. Like, this guy fought 3 pro heroes, right? Nana Shimura at her prime. I get that, there was, like, different quirks and stuff, but come on, that was like a huge stretch. And you're talking about a constantly regenerating All for One. He's pretty much regenerating and getting younger and younger and younger, and he's above 100 years old. So, you know what I'm saying? Like, it doesn't make any sense. So, in this video, we're just gonna pretty much just go above all the feats that All for One has done in the manga, and at the end, I'll be telling you what's his scale, what's his final calculations, in my humble opinion. Pretty much where we get introduced to All for One, he's pretty much just the guy behind the screen. He just pulls the strings, and he doesn't really show himself until the proper moment where he wants to end All Might, because his goal was not, I just want to kill All Might. He wanted to do that, but, he wanted to show the true face of All Might and pretty much just end him, even if it meant, sacrificing All for One's health and him getting locked up and stuff, because he's the type of character that thinks really forward ahead of his time to get to his point. So anyway, the first time we see All for One, fight, I guess, in the anime is in his fight between him and All Might. We have a weakened All Might, not just a weakened All Might. He passed down the embers of One for All, and he's pretty much just on his last straws because he was fighting the Nomus, he rescued Bakugo, he didn't have any time to rest, and then he came down to the scene, and then he started fighting with All for One. And that pretty much, like, was taking a toll on All Might himself. On the other hand, All for One was just pretty much showed up, started clapping, like, you guys have made it, you guys are about to get cooked. And he pretty much cooked everyone. Best Genist, cooked him. He became more like best meanest. That was a bad joke. But you get the point. All the side characters as well, Ragdoll and the others, he pretty much just ends them, right? And he steals one of their quirks. Anyway, what's really interesting about All for One, and I feel like one of the most interesting quirks that he have that unleashes a big range of attacks, is his basically shockwave, pushing arms that he have, the air cannons that he fills his arms with. And I feel like that's pretty interesting. I feel like he did get that quirk when he wanted to fight All Might for the second time, because he was pretty much knowing that I'm fighting a guy that can generate tornadoes from the power of his punch. So I gotta deflect that. And he pretty much did that. He was pretty much unleashing just wide scale of attacks while he was also holding back, and while also All Might was holding back because there was civilians nearby. But pretty much what we get to see him is him destroying like a small city, I guess the Camino, right? And then pretty much when he get to show off his attack is when he combines all of his quirks into one giant fist and pretty much just goes toe to toe with All Might, which I gotta say is a stupid idea. If we were to be like thinking from a logical standpoint, after he got All Might to his weakened state, he could have just unleashed more air cannons at All Might and pretty much just defeated him right there and then. Maybe even he could have killed him, and that would have been like even more pathetically of a loss to All Might. But I guess, we don't want to kill All Might. All Might is my favorite character. Thank God Horikoshi didn't do that, by the way. But it was a really interesting fight until the last fist clash, because it was pretty much just power against power, I guess. And the scale of attacks, if we look at it from that perspective, was All for One from the beginning knew he couldn't win against All Might in their second fight. And the reason for that is he was using the air cannons, he was trying to use the students and the civilians as bait to weaken All Might and shorten his time so he could also hammer him while he's weakened. That was All for One's original plan, which is, I think, is his best weapon, is that his mind is the best. I feel like he's probably the smartest character in My Hero Academia, if he didn't get done dirty, as I said, because sometimes he's just thinking in a really amazing way. He's like making all those amazing possibilities, and sometimes he's just dumb. He's just bland dumb, And I feel like that maybe the reason for that is maybe he's just a bit too cocky to admit that his plan might not work. He seems really similar to Dutch from Red Dead Redemption 2, if you guys know the game, but obviously like a lot more our farmer, I guess. But yeah, that's the first time we encounter All for One. Now, what's really interesting, if we go to the Vigilantes manga, All for One summoned 300 villains, basically, from like the explosions and stuff, just to buy some time so that All Might can show up and, basically deal with the villains. With All for One, it's not about speed. He's not a really fast character, at least like from what we see. He pretty much is a still character that makes his surroundings react for him. If you look at all of his fights, from the old fights to the new fights, he always has stuff reacting for him. He manipulates the weather or the air around him. He manipulates the rubble. He manipulates anything to just deflect things against him. He's not trying to deflect things with himself. And I feel like that's a really interesting point. If you look at All Might, on the other hand, he's the opposite guy. And I feel like that's a really interesting choice. What I thought was interesting was the way that Horikoshi showed off the new quirks of All for One, because pretty much All for One worked on his situation. While All Might tried to maintain his form for like 3 hours a day, All for One pretty much knew that he couldn't keep all of his quirks, so he had to like decide, okay, I have like slots and I have to fill them according to what I'm gonna fight with. In his first encounter with All Might, he pretty much had the air cannons, the spikes and stuff to get his villains out and to fight and weaken All Might and then, try to defeat him with that. In his second appearance, as like the final war arc started, basically we get to see him having different quirks with each finger, and he's pretty much trying to be more specific with his quirks and more direct or more technical, I feel like. Now, I get that he was kind of like jumped, I guess. Like they tried to corner him with like, the ear beats, with Hawks, with Endeavor, with Gigantomachia even coming in, Mount Lady. Like we had all these characters coming in and try Dark Shadow as well. But at the same time, you see two things. You see the character's overwhelming all for one at one side, and then in a split of a second, he just unleashes this laser that cuts down Gigantomachia. And it was really interesting because he had all these quirks, and especially with his rewind ability, he's now kind of like healing from his injury. And that was really interesting. Yes, he did fight with Endeavor, and I feel like in his fight with Endeavor, he shouldn't have lost to him. Because if you think about it, Endeavor is a lot weaker than All Might, even a weakened All Might. And I'm not exaggerating at this point. Because if you look at Endeavor, yes, he did some great feats. He did, defeat the high end Nomu and stuff. But he's not on All for Ones or a weakened All for One or a weakened All Might level. He's not there. Because if he was, he would have helped All Might with that fight, with their second fight. He knows he's not there, even if he pushes himself. That's what I don't get in My Hero Academia. Yes, he did have a redemption arc, whatever, and he is getting stronger, but not to that level, because then the gap between him and All Might and All for One doesn't make sense. The story behind why he got so angry was because there is so much of a gap between him and All Might. And who's the closest person to All Might in terms of a power? It's All for One. So that's why I'm saying like he got done really dirty in that fight. First by Endeavor. Second, we have like Jiro. No disrespect, but like come on. Jiro, seriously, of all the people. Dark Shadow, I gotta give it. He's a good, strong creature. Gigantomachia and the others coming towards him to try to gang up on him. Still not enough, because you're talking about prime All for One. And people don't really get this because you go back to the OVA of like him fighting off against Nanashimura and Gran Torino, and him doing this huge ass explosion with no effort whatsoever, right? And then you see him struggling against those guys, even though, yeah, Gigantomachia is strong, Dark Shadow is strong, but All Might can knock Gigantomachia out with a single punch. All for One can also knock Gigantomachia out with a single punch. We already saw that with him cutting him down with a laser. He basically tore his shoulder off. So we then get to see his speed. Now, something about the speed of My Hero Academia also doesn't make a lot of sense, because when he was asked what was the fastest speed that All Might went into in his prime, he said like Mach 3 or something, which is about like 10,700 kilometers or something like that. It's in that range, which also doesn't make a lot of sense, because he traveled from Tokyo to Osaka and defeated a dozen of villains, catched his pillow in 3 seconds in the Vigilantes manga. That's why I'm saying like the power scaling also doesn't make sense. I get that he's trying to give his characters chances, but at the same time it doesn't really work with All for One or All Might. Like he's doing that on behalf of those characters or on top of those characters. It doesn't really make that sense. So anyway, we get to see him fight against weakened All Might in a robot suit, which, like, yeah, that fight was interesting, but again, the power scaling was just, I guess, like, downgraded down to earth, because if you look at, like, a weakened All Might when he was basically beating the living crap out of Nomu, right? And you see him like destroying the stadium, destroying the ground under him and everything like that. You see a weakened All for One destroying Camino with like a single air cannon, right? And that just doesn't make a lot of sense when you look at it of how much destruction that All for One is causing right now. Yes, he's rewinding, but it doesn't really make a lot of sense. Anyway, we move forward then to him fighting against Bakugo and Bakugo finally defeating him, which also is downgraded to him. So I feel like maybe even the most character in My Hero Academia that got done dirty is probably All for One. If I have to give him like a final scale just to get down with everything, I try to summarize everything as much as I can. I would say he is an Iceland level, right? And in terms of speed, if he uses like his air cannons and stuff, he's not really that fast. I would say like he may be even like as fast as Lita in his like prime, I guess. But again, All for One doesn't use speed stuff. He doesn't use stuff on himself that much. He pretty much just tries to use the surroundings of him. If you look at his quirks, if you look at his activity, I guess, if you look at him flying towards Shigaraki, he's not really going that fast. He's probably going like probably max the speed of sound, maybe even lesser than that, because it took him like a really long time to get there. So that's for that. And he also like uses portals and stuff. In terms of like planning, he's like I think like the smartest guy when the plot, doesn't help the characters. So that's for that. He's an Iceland level character. I feel like if I were to rank him, as you guys know, I think All Might is number one. Not because Deku is weaker than him. In terms of feat, I'm talking about like, stuff that they actually did. All Might did more impressive and more bigger and more faster stuff than Deku ever did. Even though Deku has one for all, 6 other quirks, and he's just like a powerhouse, but apparently he's weaker than All Might. That's what the manga showed us, and I'm not just pulling this out of me. I'm just saying what I saw in the manga, what you guys saw in the manga. So All Might is number one. I would say Shigaraki, the enhanced Shigaraki, the 100% Shigaraki is number two. Deku at number three, and All for One at number 4. I feel like if Deku and All for One have ever fought, All for One might actually win. Not because he's stronger than Deku, but I feel like he's a really manipulative person that he might actually win against Deku, because Deku is much more emotionally vulnerable than All Might, because he's just more emotional. He's just a crybaby. You guys know that. That's not a bad thing. I'm just saying, in general, if they ever fought, I feel like that would be the outcome. Anyway, I hope you guys have enjoyed this video. Let me know down below if I've missed anything. Definitely check out the other power scaling videos that I did on All Might or Deku or Shigaraki. And I hope to see you guys next time.